So one of the most important controls on mobile devices is the list control. Most applications in some form usually have lists of information, and you can choose from that, or you just browse things in a list fashion. So it's definitely an important control to master. So what I've done is I've imported the list controls project that's in your exercise files in the chapter 3 folder. So just import that here into Eclipse. And it's just a basic project. The only difference is in the resources folder, in the values folder, I have this countries.xml. And if we actually look at this, it just has 5 countries here, and we have a string array, which is a way to obviously create an array of strings here in XML. And we have an item with the name of the country, and then we have the text that's actually inside of this. And we're just going to display these items inside of an Android list control. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is let's go to our main.java file. Now you can see here that this by default extends the activity class. So if we're dealing with an activity which is made up of a list control, we can actually have it extend the list activity class instead of activity. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so again, this is now extending the list activity. So now what I have to do in my XML is to add a list control. So let's go to our main.xml file, and this is just blank at this point. So if we look here, we just have a linear layout. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to composite, and we have a bunch of other controls here, and I'm going to add a list view control. So I'm just going to drag it out like that. I'm just going to have it fill the entire parent here just by clicking this. Now, one of the things that's important when you're using the list activity is we have to give our list view a specific ID. So here we actually need to give it an ID of @Android:ID/list. So again, this has to be a specific ID here because our list activity is going to be looking for it. And it can be the only list in this list activity. Now, there are other ways in which you can put a list view amongst other items in an activity, and we're not going to get to that in this course. If you just want to have a list view in an activity, this is what you have to do. You need to add it and then give it this ID. So let's go back to the main.java file. Now, what we have to do in order to get the data into that list view is we need to set the list adapter. So an adapter is basically a component that takes some data and adapts it for display, in this case, into a list view. So we're going to do set list adapter. Now, this is actually expecting us to pass in an instance of the list adapter class, but we're actually going to pass in a new instance of array adapter. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to take an array of information and adapt it so that it can be displayed inside of our list. Now, there's a bunch of override constructors here, and the one you choose is dependent on the type of list that you're constructing. So if we have a custom list where it's not just a piece of text, then we're going to actually need to provide the resource ID of the text view in order to target it. But in our case, since we're just using a simple list with just a text representation, we're going to choose this second one, which is basically the context, which we always have to pass, and then the resource. So which layout resource do we want to use? Now, we haven't created a separate layout for our list item here, and that's because it's just a simple text view. There are already layouts for that, which we can take advantage of. So we're going to click that. Now for context, again, in this case, we can actually just use this. There are multiple ways to provide the correct context. It can be this. If you're inside of an anonymous, like event handler, you can use main.this. You can also use get application context. It really depends on where you're actually trying to give that property. But we need to give it the type here. This is actually an array of strings that's coming from that countries.xml file. So we're going to give it a type of string. Now for the resource, which resource do we want to use to lay out our list? We didn't create a specific one, so we can use one of the built-in ones that are in Android. And to get that, we're going to go to android.r. So this is very much like the resource file that's generated for our own resources, But we can get to the ones that are part of the Android SDK as well by saying android.r. And then we want to go to layout. And then there's a layout in there called simple list item 1, which is basically just a text view. So again, if we wanted a customized list, we'd have to create our own list view or our own actual layout for each row, which we'll do actually in the next movie. But for now, we're just going to use this simple list item. Now, to get the countries out of that XML file, all we have to do is now provide the resource ID. But we can't just give the ID directly. So what we need to do is to call the getResources method. And this is going to get all the resources that are in our project. And we're going to call getStringArray. And remember, inside of this country's XML file, we have just that, a string array. And now we're going to pass in the ID. We're going to say r.array, because remember, inside that country's .xml file, we have this string array. So r.array, then countries. And let's go ahead and close that up. So this seems a little complicated, but it's actually not when you break it down. So we want to set the data on that list. So we're creating an array adapter, which, like I mentioned, is a way to take certain information and adapt it so that it can be displayed in our list. We pass in the context. Then we provide a layout resource for the way each row is going to be laid out. But since we just have a regular text view, we can use one of the built-in ones. We don't need to customize that. And then we use this to actually get to the XML file and pull out the string array and apply it to our list. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch this. Launch it as an Android application. And let's go ahead and go over to our emulator. We'll let that launch up. And now you can see our list is displaying our items. And this is basically just the stock standard Android list. So what we're going to do in the next movie is we're going to customize this a little bit and provide a flag image next to each of the country names. And then that's going to require us to create a custom layout file to tell Android how to lay out each row.